All right. So, lesson 3. We're going to look at day's creation. Okay. So your Bibles again should be open to Genesis chapter 1. And we asked you to read there verses 9 through 19. So everybody's got their Bibles open to Genesis chapter 1, verses 9 through 19. Now read those here. So we had the first day in which God created what again? Just as a review, the first day God created, Colin? Heaven and the earth, and, Jennifer? Light, which separated the day from night. Good. And on day 2, what did God do on day 2? Amber? Firmament, to separate the waters above, that hold all the bodies in place from the waters below. Okay? All right, verse 9. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the herb bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. Maybe just to pique your interest here a minute. Verse 12, what argument does that create always? Oh, you've had it in here. Some of you have, at least 7th and 8th graders. What argument does verse 12 create? Reread verse 12 to yourself. It's kind of a silly argument, maybe even a bit worthless. But yet, we still have it. Colin? What argument does that create then? Okay, there is that, but I'm looking for something a little bit different. It's towards the end of verse 12. Take a look at that. What are you curious about there? What is that pointing out to us? Amber? No, I'm looking for something a little bit different. Not after his kind. Did you have something, Kenton? Did you say the same thing? Jen? Okay, what does that mean? The seed was in itself. What argument does that create? What argument does that create? Silly argument. The argument that it creates is, what's a fruit and what's a vegetable? Is a tomato a fruit or vegetable, Brody?
A fruit.
It's a fruit technically, because where is its seed? In itself, just like verse 12 said. What's an avocado? A fruit technically, because it is in itself. And the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself. So we always have the argument, right? Kind of a silly one. Anyways, all right. So let's take a look at days 3 and 4. I asked you what was created or done on day 3. What'd you put there? Logan. Okay. God made dry land and seas. Okay, remember, we talked about the earth. It was kind of like that cake batter. It was all mixed together, was without form and void. Okay, and here God separates them. So if we change to a different analogy, let's go to the analogy of building a house. Okay? Building a house. What's the first thing that gets done when you build a house? What do you need to be just perfect?
A foundation.
Foundation. If you don't have a solid foundation, right? We sing how firm a foundation. Christ, the solid rock I stand, that foundation of the church. But a house needs a foundation too. And that's what God here does on day 3. He separates the land from the waters. Okay? What types of land are there? what types of land is there today? I mean, what think of the whole world, every place in the world. What types of things cover the land so that we differentiate and say, well, this land is this and this is that? Kenton? Yeah, what would mountain land be categorized mainly as? Generally, mountains. Made out of rock. Okay? Now, in the bottoms, yes, the rocks are covered with nice dirt to make lush meadows and trees, but as you get to the top, they're rock really underneath. Joe, you were going to say something? Mountains. Kenton also said deserts. What are deserts characterized by, Megan? Golden Desert, what's covered in the desert? A lot of times sand. Okay. If we were to head out to, say, Kansas, what's covering the land in Kansas? Joe? Prairies. Or we were to go out to the middle of, say, Russia, prairie land, rich grasslands that are flat and have soil full of minerals and nutrients, great for the plants. So, God, when He created the land, probably created different types of lands. Now, I asked you also to look up 2 Peter 3, verses 6 and 7. Because they tell us what? What do they tell us about before and after? Colin? Okay, good. Amber?
First the world was destroyed by water and the flood, and at the end of the world, when Christ comes, the world will be destroyed by fire.
Okay. Sometimes we don't always think that, boy, studying grammar and language is so important, but it is. We'll show some different examples later this year on how it can make a huge difference. But here, if we look at 2 Peter 3, verse 6, we have the world that then was. So then is the world that God created with Adam and Eve in it. Okay? That world was then, and it's changed in the next phrase from the world that now is. Those two words, then and now, make a big difference. That tells us that the world that we see and look at is different. Were there huge mountains, or were those rocky mountains under the rich, lush soil in creation that gave forth life to all those plants? Were there huge mountains? We know that before the flood, what didn't happen? What didn't happen before the flood? Logan, it didn't rain. God probably watered the earth with a mist. I'll show you a video of that tomorrow. Okay? Where there are a few places on earth where that still happens. It never rains, and yet it's lush, and animals and birds and plants abound there. How is that possible? Okay? In fact, man has now come up with a way to also get water in a place where it never rains. How is that possible? Okay? That's what the Garden of Eden was like in all that God created in that first world. There was never rain. It was a mist that watered the land. So it's hard for us to understand what it must have looked like. As many scientists study, godly scientists, they say there's a good chance that yes, the earth was one large mass on the globe. We now have the 7 continents that we study. Was it all one piece at a time? More than likely it was. In the world that then was is different than the world that now is. Okay? So, did they have the mountains, or were the mountains formed when God burst up the waters below and the rocks were pushed up through the soil? Okay? The Grand Canyon, was it formed by the splitting of rock and forming this beautiful canyon? Okay? Or was it sediment that rested there in pressure? We don't know all those answers. Those are things to be curious about, but we don't know all of them. Okay? But anyways, God did that. So those things were the foundation. And then, as was also said, the seas. He called forth the seas, and He probably made, on that dry land, He probably made, well, we know He made rivers, right? Because the Bible tells us that there were 4 rivers bordering the garden. Okay? Lakes and ponds and streams that were probably running through those. So he called the waters together, and then the oceans that covered the earth as well. So we see that on day 3. Good. So that's kind of like the foundation of the house, we can say. And then, maybe the wood structure of the house being built on top of that strong foundation. Now, what did God put maybe into the soil for man to find or use later on? Because everything that, God's not going to create anything new on day 43 or 5 years after Noah came out of the ark. God's not, everything that is here today in the earth, that's not man-made, was here when God created the earth. So what are some things we put into the ground for man to find and use? What would he put there, Colin?
Iron.
Maybe iron. Good. What else? Amber. Gold. Brody. Minerals. All those things, God filled the earth with riches to be able for man to use, to be able to create tools and instruments, metals. Okay? So those things were there too. All right. Now what about day 4? What did God do on day 4? Oh, hang on. No, we stopped. Sorry, we need to go back to day 3 because we said the foundation was the dirt, right? The earth. And the waters are separated. But then, now we need to talk about the foundation, like the wood of the house. And then the decoration of the house too. Sorry, almost overlooked that. Amber? Plants. What's another? Well, what are some things in the category maybe we categorize as plants but are large? Logan? Trees. Okay? God put trees, okay? Mature trees. So again, the question always that people ask, well, great, if God put mature trees, did they have rings? Why wouldn't they? Okay, just like God created Adam, he wouldn't start out with no hair, but he had hair. Okay? So anyways, God placed trees and plants. Where do all plants and trees grow towards? What direction do they always grow? Jennifer? Up. Towards the sun. Okay? Their life comes from the sun, and that's a good reminder for us too. Our lives, everything should point up to Jesus Christ, okay? To God. Those plants, they can't move around. Okay, so unlike animals, they can't think in a sense that an animal can. Okay, they don't have blood like an animal or a human has. Okay, but their purpose there is to absorb, obviously, the water and the sunlight and to grow and to be nutritious for animals and for man. But it also is like mom decorating her house. Okay? Dad working outside. Maybe he's trying to make the outside of the house look nice. God made his ground beautiful by putting plants and flowers and fruits and everything else on that land to make it beautiful. Okay? He filled it with beauty. Okay? So, just like God, nowadays fills our freezers and our kitchens and refrigerators with food, he filled his earth with food at that time for Adam and Eve to be able to eat and all that would come after him. And again, things were different. There weren't weeds and thorns and thistles, and the ground wasn't hard, and you didn't have areas where it was lush, it was thick. So much so that was probably Adam's main job, was to make sure he constantly was trimming back the overgrowing plants and leaves to keep it in a beautiful looking state. Okay, trimmed it back. It was so lush and grew so fast. So we got that in day 3 as well. So we've got the dry land and seas and the plants. Day 4, what did God do in day 4? Let's see. What'd you put down there? I think, Sydney, what'd you have there for day 4? Yes. God created the sun, moon, and stars, the light holders. So I guess if you imagine again a house, it's the lights in there. Now some things in the house are for giving light, and other things are for reflecting light. Mirrors, glass, okay, walls, they reflect light. So what gives light in God's creation? What can give its own light? that God created on the fourth day? Jaden? The sun. What else? What can give its own light? Anybody else? Logan? Okay, stars. Stars are just like the sun. They're large balls of gas that give forth energy in the form of light and heat, radiation, okay? So that plants, us as humans and other things, can use that light and that energy. Very good. What does the moon do? How does the moon work? Different than the sun and the stars. Okay? How is it different? Kenton? Reflects the sun's light. It does not give its own light. It reflects it. Now, there were some mistakes that were made by not only scientists, but even great men of God like Martin Luther and John Calvin about our universe. What can we say about every planet, everything in the universe, the whole cosmos, about its... Yeah, Logan? Say it again? Well, they're round. We can say that. Maybe not everything's perfectly round. Yeah, I'm sorry. I started that. Let's go back. What was the error John Calvin and Martin Luther made about the solar system that we think of, that we're part of? What was their mistake? Along with most scientists of the day. Joe? All right, the earth is the center because it seems like we're sitting still and the sun is going past us every day and the moon goes past us, so we must be the center because God created the earth the center and everything moves around, and that's false. We think of the sun, everything, the earth revolves around the sun and all the other planets, but the sun is not sitting still, it's not the center. The sun is just one part of one tiny little galaxy, of a huge galaxy, and those big galaxies are always moving around too. Okay? So everything is moving in God's creation. Nothing stands still. It's always moving. Okay? And the sun, not only does it give light and it gives energy and it reflects, but what are some things that the sun controls time-wise? I asked that in there. What are some things in your life that are controlled by time? Megan? Okay, seasons. When the sun is closer to the earth, we get summer. When it's far away, it's winter. When it's in the middle, we get spring and fall. Okay, what else does the sun control? Jaden? Day and night. Good. What else does the sun control? Amber? Okay. Nowadays we have alarm clocks, but yeah, if we live 150 years ago, you got up with the sun, and you went down with the sun. Okay. Good. What else does the sun control? If we go all the way around the sun one time, that tells us it's what? When the earth goes around the sun one full time. Jennifer? It's a year. Okay, so you just had your birthday. You got to wait till the earth goes around the sun one full time for it to be your birthday again. Okay. Now, you're a little bit older. There's a few other things that we can understand that the sun controls as we get closer and farther away from it. Not only does it control the amount of heat, but the amount of heat that is radiated towards Earth also controls what? Think of weather. That's seasonal. Yep, we talked about that seasonal. But what else does the sun affect? It's heat or lack of heat sometimes. Colin? Okay. And that movement of air makes what? Wind. Okay, the winds, the storms. Those things happen when cold air hits warm air. Well, what's making cold air warmer? Well, it's the sun. So the sun also controls the weather. Okay, God is in control of our weather as well through the sun. What does the moon control? What does the moon control? Joel? The tides. Okay? The moon controls the tides. There was a really neat book I read as a kid, and I always look forward to, boy, someday I'd like to see a little video of how that worked. And the other day I got to see it. Maybe I'll send you a link and you can watch it at home. But if you lived by the North Pole, if you were living with Native Americans living way up at the North Pole, okay, Eskimos we would probably call them, they know that on the longest day of the year, okay, in the middle of summer, which for them means what's never going to go down when you get up there by the North Pole. What never sets, Megan? The sun. It's daylight the whole day. But they know on that longest day of the year and the day before and the day after, and that's about it. And if the moon is just right, the sun and the moon both pull the tides. And there was a book that I read when I was young about a little Eskimo girl. And that Eskimo girl with her parents would look forward to 1 or 2 days of the year. They would get to go below the ice. They would carve a hole in the ice, and there would not be any water down there because the tide pulled it so far out to sea, and the ice would stay intact over their heads that they could go down and they could explore for a little while under the ice and see what was down there. The kelp would just be laying there with no water around it. And there might be sea urchins and starfish, and there would be other little creatures. And her parents were down there for mussels, okay, the little clams, because that would give them food and protein that they wouldn't be able to have at that time of year in the cold winter. And then, in only a matter of 15 or 20 minutes, the tides would already start coming back in and they'd have to quickly get out. So I read about that as a kid. It was a storybook, a nice picture book. And, I don't know, just a month ago on PBS, they had a video that showed the Eskimos doing that. They waited until the tide went out. They quickly cut a hole in the ice. They quickly went down on a ladder, and they went down there, and for 10, 12 minutes, they picked up as many mussels as they could throw into their baskets and quickly throw them up. And already by the time they were scurrying up the ladders, the water was coming back in, and the hole was being shifted and moved by that floating ice moving around. So that some of them, once in a while, die down there because they can't get out fast enough. Okay? But that's how God uses the moon to control the tides. Okay? So those light bearers rule the details of our lives. Okay? Finally, I asked you there to read Malachi 4 verse 2 and Revelation 22 verse 16. Both of those texts refer to light, but what is that light speaking of there? Light also in the Bible is a picture of, Amber, Jesus. Okay? Light is a picture of Jesus. Jesus is the light that comes in the darkness. At that dark time between those 400 years between the Old Testament and the New Testament, Jesus came in that time of darkness to bring light to the world. And when the world is darkened by sin here, again, at the end, Jesus will once again come and be that light to call his people home, and all will be able to see. All others who have not bowed the knee to him will be able to see and say, he is God of heaven and earth and Lord. But it will be too late for them, and Jesus will take us, his people, away to new heavens and new earth, and this earth will be destroyed. Okay? So the earth that God created in day 3 that we think of dry land and seas will be destroyed one day. Okay? All right.